Today I'm going to show you two methods to create a snowball block. The more common method is the stitch and flip, and that one has one square. I'm using a 5.5-inch square, and I'm going to snowball or put triangles in the four corners made up of a 2-inch square. So I have 4 2-inch squares cut, and then I have my main square, which is my red 5-inch square. Now the cut and stitch method actually uses one 5.5-inch square, just like before, for the center of our snowball, but then we only use 2 squares that are going to be cut in half and placed in the four corners. There's a little bit of saving when it comes to fabric. We have a little more waste, not much, with the stitch and flip. As you can see, we'll be using 4 squares for those 4 corners, and then half of that square is going to be wasted. It will be trimmed off. Whereas with the cut and stitch, we are going to be cutting these 2 squares on the diagonal and then actually using all 4 squares. So we'll talk about that second. We're going to do the more common method, which is the stitch and flip first. So that's going to be my demonstration. Hi everyone, it's Mary from Joyful and Mary Quilting. So here's our snowball block. We are going to be using this 5-inch by 5-inch square, and then we want to have 2-inch corners on our snowball. So we are going to cut 2-inch squares, and I have those 4 2-inch squares cut. The next thing that we'll do is we are going to draw on the wrong side of the 2-inch squares a diagonal line from corner to corner using our pencil. You can use a 0.7mm pencil or something similar. You want something that has a sturdy lead that will write easily on fabric, but that also won't break when you're writing on fabric. I also like my Soline pencil. This one has ceramic leads, which makes them really a lot more durable. They don't break as easily. And the nice part about it is I have it tuned in to the pencil lead, the black lead, but all you do is you can turn it. If you have different colored fabrics, you can have a pink lead, you can have a white lead. There are other colors too that can be used, a green lead, a yellow lead. It's up to you, you just fill the pen. So the first thing again we're going to do is draw those diagonals. We're going to use our ruler and make sure that we position it so that when we draw the diagonals, I like to start from the center and work out, just because the fabric does stretch a little when we're drawing that diagonal on the bias, and this keeps it from getting misshapen. So I start in the center, I go this direction, and as you can see, I have a very, very thin line because we want to make sure that our pencil lead doesn't take up too much room. This is our sewing line, and if it takes up too much room, our block is going to be a tiny bit off. So here we go. I have all 4 of those triangles marked. So we are now going to place them in the 4 corners and snowball our block. It's important to pay close attention that we have our pencil line going in the right direction. We want to make sure that it actually creates that snowball. You don't want one twisted the other direction. So we've got these pieces. The other thing you want to do to make sure for accuracy is that you have lined up your raw edges, as I have here, as best as you can. You don't want them to be crooked at all. So here we have the raw edges are meeting on all the corners. Here, 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 here. This one's a little bit off. And we want to then sew on this marked line. I want to make sure that my squares stay in position. So that's where I use my Elmer's washable glue stick. And I just open it up, and I'm going to just put a little dot of glue right there. That's going to keep it in place. It doesn't gum up your sewing machine needle because it just doesn't, and it's far enough away from the stitching line you don't have to worry about it. The other thing is that when you do this, you don't need to use pins. You just put that mark in the corner and it secures it in place. This area is going to be trimmed off anyway. All we want to do is keep it in place while we're sewing. Now, this is the tricky part when it comes to the snowball block, because you don't want to sew exactly on this line. You want to sew on the side of the line closest to the corner. not the inside, on the outside. So you're going to actually make your stitch line right next to, without going on top of, the diagonal line. Keeping it straight is really important, because if you don't, then you're going to have a little bit of a curve in your seam and it's going to show on your snowball. So that's where it can be a little bit tricky, because you don't have any kind of a guide here that you're using. All you have is this line that you are going to basically freehand, free sew with your machine right along that line. So I have sewn just to the outside toward the corner of each of those pencil lines. You can see they're just to the outside. They are not on the line, but they are just to the outside. And we try and be as careful, as I said, as we can, but we're freehanding, so it's a little difficult. Then we're going to take our ruler with our 1/4 inch marking. Mine's a dashed line on this Creative Grids ruler. And I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch seam. I'll place that dashed line on the seam that I sewed, and then I'm going to trim off those corners. So I'll do that on all 4 corners. It's really an easy block. It's so cute in the end, and you can use it for so many different types of fabrics, even an I Spy, or just something that's in between another block that gives it some dimension. Once we have trimmed those up, we are going to be pressing towards those triangles, and that's what's going to give us our snowball, as you can see. So once we have pressed towards those triangles, we are basically finished. So here's our finished block, and it looks pretty good. Now, the thing that is difficult for me with the snowball block doing the stitch and flip method is I'm never always exactly positive it's going to be perfectly square. Now this one I just did, and it really does look pretty good. We're going to take the ruler and we're going to see how it actually lines up. We know we want a 5-inch snowball block, and if we look, it really does look pretty good. What our key points are on here is we want 1 inch here, 1 inch here, 1 inch here, and 1 inch here, which this one, as you can see, it's a tiny bit off just by the way I sewed it. Not that it's going to make a huge difference. It really depends on where this block is going to be in your quilt. But if you are trying to match up other blocks, you want to make sure you keep this just as close as you can to the measurement that you're looking for. So this one looks good. But the first one that I did, I just want to show you this one. I did it the same way, but if I line this up, you can see that it's crooked. I mean, I tried really hard to keep everything in line. You can see I'm a little bit off here. I'm really off here, which means that my marked line either maybe wasn't marked as accurately as it should have been. My pressing is good because I can see that's good, but you can see here the same thing. It comes out here, it's shorter here. It isn't exactly perfect. Are any of our blocks perfect? I don't know, probably not. But if I am going to hook this block to another one, I want to make sure that I can nest this as easily as possible. Now the other thing is, if you're going to nest blocks like this, you're going to want to press one seam in the opposite direction. So you need to do a little pre-planning. So as you can see, this block looks really good. It's really accurate. Did this one the same way? Not quite as accurate. Probably if I do 30 blocks, I'm going to have a few of them that are going to look more like this than like this. That's what happens with the stitch and flip method. You get good at it the more you do, but there's always that room for error because we're basically freehanding when we're using our sewing machine that seam line. We don't have a guide that keeps us on the straight and narrow. So now we are going to do the cut and stitch method in order to achieve the exact same result. First of all, you need to know what size triangles are going to be in the corner. If we look at this with our ruler, those are 2-inch triangles. They measure 2 inches by 2 inches. So we know that we have 2-inch triangles. Now remember, in the stitch and flip, we just cut 2-inch squares. But we want to use 2 squares and use the entire square in the cut and stitch method rather than 4 and waste half of each of those 4 squares. So we need a formula to figure out how big do we cut these squares. The first thing we're going to do is take that 2-inch measurement, we're going to subtract 1/2 inch. So 2 inches subtract 1/2 inch is 1.5 inches. It doesn't matter what size corner you have. If you have a 3-inch corner, if you have a 1-inch corner, whatever it is, you're still going to always subtract 1/2 inch from that corner measurement. So we're doing 2, so we're going to take 2 minus 1/2. That gives us 1.5 inches. So once we've had the 1.5 inch measurement, we are going to add 1.25 to that measurement. Again, whatever corner triangle you're going to have, you take the triangle measurement, subtract 1/2 inch, and add 1.25 inches. So once you've done that for this particular block, for a 2-inch corner, you are going to cut your squares 2 3/4 inches. And you'll need 2 because we're going to cut them in half and we're going to use them in those 4 corners. So we have done that. I have my 5-inch square. I have my 2 3/4 inch squares that I will cut on the diagonal. And then I'm just going to set those aside. Now keep in mind that the stitch and flip, there is no wiggle room when it comes to those corner triangles. Once you've sewn them, that's it. You don't have any extra to trim back. Where this method, you have a little bit of extra, which helps you to make that block that much more square. So I have done that. Now what we need to do is we are going cut and stitch. We're going to cut those corners off first before we add the triangles. And it's very simple the way that we do that. We are going to do the same thing that we did before. We are going to measure 1.5 inches. Remember, that was that number we got. 2 inches minus 1/2 inch is 1.5. And we are going to measure 1.5 inches from each corner and make a mark. So we're going to have 8 marks on this particular square. I find it the easiest if I just take my square ruler and I position 1.5 inches. We've got 1.5 here, 1.5 here, and then I'm just going to make a little line on this side and a little line on that side. Now keep in mind, the pencil takes up room. When we cut, we're going to cut from the underside of this marking and the left side of this marking, and we are going to trim off that corner. So I don't want it over that line. I want it just where that line hits the raw edge, and then I'm trimming it off. You're going to do the same thing with all 4 corners. Place your ruler here. You're going to make sure everything's lined up accurately. 1 line here. You can also use your cutting mat. My Martelli cutting mat is great for this because it's very accurate, and I can position my block, my square, so that I can actually line up the edges with this 1/2, 1, 1.5, 1/2, 1, 1.5, and I can just trim off that edge this way. And it achieves the same result. Now, if you're a little nervous about doing that, then just mark them. I think it works for me just as easy to mark them. I feel like then I've got a little bit more control, and I know that that is an accurate measurement. Once again, place my ruler right at the edge, not over it, and then once again cut that off. So now my square is trimmed. Another thing I do, you don't have to, but I like to put an arrow that tells me which way is up, because sometimes I can get these mixed up because they look so close and put the squares on the wrong corners. We want to make sure that we put the squares on the corners. So I just put a little arrow, or you can do this or whatever. It's not going to show through, but you can mark those are the places where we are going to be putting our triangles. So we'll take our triangles and we're ready to add them. Remember, we cut and then we are going to sew once these are placed. Now what I like to do, they're a little oversized. We're going to remember put them in the corners. They need to be centered. So an easy way to center it is to take your background fabric and wrong sides together, line up those points and give it a little finger press. Okay, so we've got that pressed, and then we're going to take this right sides together. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to make sure that our points are all matched up nicely. Finger press. And then right sides together, we're going to just, those 2 little divots, the folds, just lay right on top of each other. And now that it's centered, so we don't have to worry about it moving to the point that the block is off, it's going to be just in the right spot when we're ready to trim after we've sewn it. So you're going to do the same thing here. Wrong sides together, finger press, right sides together, finger press, and then again, those little divots right here, just line right up. And I like to pin it just because I think it keeps everything in order. You don't have to, especially if you're doing a lot and you're comfortable with it, just go on ahead and sew. This is where it's important that you have your guide on your sewing machine lined up so that you can actually sew that accurate seam on all four corners. So I have done that. And here are my four corners. Again, you can see they're oversized. I have sewn my 1/4 inch seam on all sides, and I am going to press it open. So you're going to press towards those corner pieces. So there we go, they're all pressed. Now we know this is an accurate 5-inch square with the corners cut off. We need to trim up those corners even with that square. So we want 5 inches. So I'm going to line up my edges here, 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 and here, and then I'm going to trim. There's one side, two sides actually. We're going to do the same thing. Now we know this 5 is lined up here and here. We're going to go ahead, trim here, and trim there. And look at that. We have that perfect block. Now, this is what I love about the cut and stitch method. It takes a little extra time, not much, just a little, but look at it, comes out perfectly. We don't have to worry about anything not lining up because we know we've sewn an accurate seam. We know that these were oversized, so we're able to trim them back to the 5 inches, and we know this was accurate, 5 inches, so it's already ready to go. So when it comes to the two methods, when it's the stitch and flip, which I use a lot, I find that I'm not quite as accurate. I have to be careful where I use this particular block when I'm putting it into a quilt. When I use the cut and sew method, I find that my blocks are much more accurate and I don't really have to think a lot about it. I just have to make sure that I have cut everything and sewn everything using my seam guide. Two different methods, two ways to put the same block together. Totally personal preference. The quilt you're putting it into makes a difference. Where you're putting it in your quilt makes a difference. And how much time you have to put it all together. I like the cut and sew method, but I use this as well. I am always trying to be joyful, but I will always be merry. Have an absolutely wonderful day.